to there.
Yeah, so
Tonight is just dealing with this. I would
Right.
at least just
Yeah.
live nearby,
Yeah,
but
so
you can
she's,
still, in your
she's actually
opinion, be
having a great time.
objective.
She's probably loving it.
But if
It's a little
the
adventure, right?
subject
It's
matter
an
is
adventure. It's a
adjacent to
local
your property,
experience.
typically,
I mean, it's the first thing they talked about.
Chalk it up to the.
It did, but it's
Yeah.
talking about that especially.
yeah, and that might be good to say, is that,
Yeah.
previously I recused myself because I think really interested in the project, but tonight it appears to
Can't
me
live
that
in
we're
Florida
only talking
without
about this
experiencing
portion.
hurricane, right?
And so therefore,
Part of the
but yeah, I
Probably,
don't
yeah,
have that
exactly, yeah.
personal conflict in it being exactly where the cost is. So I think it's okay.
I'll try to say I might not.
Nobody can ever say this eloquently as Lisa.
I know, right?
That's why I usually just say what she said.
I'm good, how are you?
She said. I'm going with.
All the tech set up, look at that, we got an extra monitor. Wait, were there always two?
Well, they're bigger,
It's over there where they're adding. Well, they are bigger.
but those were taken down and then they put up bigger ones.
Oh.
It's been
You're
a,
over here, Sean. Okay, we're 1 minute over. Sorry for the late start, but let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to our Planning Commission meeting this evening. Let's go ahead and start with a pledge of allegiance. If you all please stand with me and join with me. Thank you. So, yeah, it's been a crazy couple of weeks. I wasn't here for the last meeting, so I didn't get anybody lined up for our thought or prayer. So I'm just going to offer a really brief prayer, and then we'll get started. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for the opportunity we have to gather together as citizens of our fair town and to discuss the items before us. We thank thee for the freedom that we enjoy to do so, and for the sense of community that we have here. We ask you to bless that we can work well together and that we can find the best solutions to those issues that come before us today. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, let's jump right into it then. We will get going with the first item on our agenda, which has been scheduled for a public hearing. This is a conceptual site plan amendment for the Hive development, 555 North, 400 West. Request for an increased fence height. Corey?
Thank you, Chair Daley, members of the commission. As indicated, this is a request to amend the fencing plan that was approved for the Hive PDO project. They were approved with a 6-foot fence. That's our normal requirement. During that approval, however, there was considerable discussion about if they place a fence, how does that relate to everyone else's fence? There was an idea of discussion that wasn't a part of the original condition of approval, but was to encourage the property owner to work with the neighboring properties to the north to see if a taller fence would work out. Apparently those discussions did not come to fruition, so they installed a 6-foot fence on the property line. Indicated in their amendment, and I think they'll explain maybe the more details, but the fill and grading plan that they originally was going to allow the backyards to gently, if you will, slope to the north property line. And at that fence level, there was a swell just for the rear yard areas to take the drainage down the fence line and away from the properties to the north. Now that they've graded and developed it, it's a rather steep. So if you flatten out the yard, it would be kind of a deeper channel. If you go with the grade, it'd be a steeper backyard. So they don't want to do that. And they were aware of the opportunity to go to a taller fence. And that, in their proposal, is to take the it'll be a grade from 1 to 3 feet for retaining to take away some of that heavier slope, that steeper slope. It would keep the drainage as same, it would just now be a little bit higher onto the backyards. And then they'd put the 6-foot fence on top of it. So it's going to range from 7 feet to 9 feet in height. A couple of things that are applicable to you. I point out that the commission seemed to, at the time of the approval, give encouragement for a taller fence. So whether all that discussion, whether everybody agreed with it during that discussion, there was no vote on it. It was just, we encourage you to work with the property owners, and if need be, come back to us for a taller fence. The R8 zone does allow the commission to approve a taller fence. You can approve up to a 10-foot fence. But there needs to be a reason to do it, and it's in the best interest of the property and the city to consider a taller fence. So it's not a guarantee. It's a discretionary decision of the Planning Commission. And so they are coming to you saying, look, we have some grading problems now. We want to keep the drainage plan in place. This is the best way. Put a shorter retaining wall, put the fence on top. And it will be just for the single-family homes that are in the development. Staff looked at it. We're recommending you debate whether you think it meets the criteria to allow a taller fence. We're at staff level assuming that there was an open dialogue, since that was given to the applicant, to consider a taller fence. But one thing of clarity that if you went with my recommendation, good, it works. And this is the official digital pointer, laser pointer, so you can laser right in. So here's a situation that I'm not fully able to answer, and it come up since the staff report. The property's now been subdivided, so you have individual lots. But at the time of final site plan approval, all of the property was zoned RH, so you didn't have this commercial high. They couldn't exercise the commercial high until they fulfilled certain requirements, and one of them was platting the subdivision. So at that time, this is a private road, so this is not public. So at the time when we talked about setbacks, we measure setbacks off the front of the street, the public street. And so there's a setback here off of this street, and then there would be a setback there off of that street. And what's not clear to me is you can see that there is a distance to the new townhomes. And this is a zoning map. This is not a survey map. This is just the GIS person taking some map and putting it in. But what's important is that if this is the area of the fence, and we need to go back to the original approval and say, what did it say about this yard area?
So I looked up the plat, and it's a 20-foot setback to
Okay.
the building, the buildable area on lot 101.
Okay, that's an important component, because what the condition in the staff report says is if the fence is approved by the Planning Commission to go higher, when you hit that front yard setback, it has to drop to the 48 inches regardless. Because the fence increased height only applies to side lot lines and rear yards. So the question that has come to me is, well, why isn't this as a side lot line? The way our definitions work in our code is that, let's just use a generic lot. I'm picking a property to the north. If it's your property, it's just for illustration purposes. It's meaningless. It's meaningless in the sense of that property. It's just illustrated discussion. So let's just take 509 west there. The way our ordinance works is your front yard is measured to the setback, 25 feet. And so if you have a setback of 25 feet here, your side lot line doesn't actually begin at the street. It begins at the 25-foot setback, runs the property till you hit the rear yard setback. And then the rear yard setback is across. So the side setback does not run from back property, or the sideline does not run from back property to front property. It just runs to the setbacks. And so when you approve a fence height, it would be for behind the setback, around the backyard, and to the setback. If we were putting a fence there, that's how that fence would be measured. And then you could run a 6-foot fence to the house here, a 6-foot fence to the house, but anything out in the front yard has to be 48 inches or 4 feet. And so that's what I'm bringing up in the condition of approval, is that if you do a taller fence here, it still needs to drop to the expected front yard setback. And that was the unclarity of, when I saw the map, I'm like, wait a minute, I don't remember what distance we measured on that lot. But Lisa, thank you for looking that up. So that's what that condition means. Other than that, Chair Daly, open it up for commission questions and you can have the discussion.
I just had a comment before we get into the discussion. I think Commissioner Shagrub did have a interest that she wanted to disclose.
So I live near this, I live adjacent to the hive, but I do not live adjacent to the area that they're proposing for this fence change.
Okay.
So I would like, if you're okay, to remain up here for the discussion. I feel like I can be, you know,
Fair.
fair and judicial.
Okay.
You don't have a material gain from this, then I feel like
Yeah.
you can be an objective
Yeah.
member of the council,
Okay, thank you.
commission.
Good disclosure, though.
Yeah, and I think as the comment was, Commissioner did
I also, yes.
recuse herself from the
I did recuse
original.
myself from the original because the original included the whole entire area, and I am adjacent to the entire area as a whole.
But this is a more limited review that doesn't necessarily impact her property, her personal property.
Gotcha. Okay,
So there you have it.
thank you. You're not directly impacted then.
Not with what they're proposing.
Okay.
Nope.
Sounds good. Yeah, I had a question.
While you think of
Lost
it,
it.
I have a question. While you think of it.
Okay, go ahead.
So, explain to me how the fence setback shrinking works in this exact example along 400 West, where it's between 645 North Applewood on the corner, because their house fronts 400 West. And then the house that's in the hive will front their own street. So you'll have a side setback for 645, and you'll have a rear setback for 422.
Let's go back, make sure I got the addresses straight. So you're asking the question.
Yep, she's dialed right in.
The difference between this and this?
Yeah,
lot?
so the one in yellow
Okay.
faces 400 west, so its side setback would be the rear setback for the one on the corner for the hive.
No.
No, so here, let's just take this as an example illustrative lot, because this is going to be treated different than that lot
Yeah,
automatically by code. So in the residential low, these are two public streets. So the way we measure a corner lot is you have two front yard setbacks and you have two side yard setbacks. There's no rear yard. It's up to you whether you want to space your setback to have a rear yard. So that would be a front, that would be a front, this would be a side, this would be a side.
right,
And that's related to the house.
okay.
Now, that's interesting is after the hive was even approved, there were other places in different areas of the city that didn't like the way we did the fence setback. So before that change took place, you would build a 6-foot fence here, a 6-foot fence here. When you reach this setback, so if this was a corner lot and this was the street side yard setback, that'd be 20 feet. You would drop the fence to 4 feet out to the sidewalk. So you could tie the 6-foot fence back to here to give yourself some private space, but you would essentially leave this all open with no taller than a 44-foot fence.
Okay,
The new change that happened after the hive went into play, that's why it gets really complex here, is people didn't like the idea that they couldn't fence the side yard of their homes on the corner lot. And that becomes now just a design criteria, because you're going down two different streets. And so there's concerns about if you had a driveway here and a 6-foot fence, there's a site triangle problem. And so they've addressed it and said, all right, we'll change our code. We're not going to keep the side area open any longer. So today, you could start here at your street side setback, do 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet, till you hit the front setback again, and then you could tie it back. And so this lot would be able, or is eligible today, to put a fence down, because that would be their side, street side yard. The difference, if you scroll up just a little bit, is this is a private street, and that's not where things are measured from. You think of it as just a private driveway. And so this lot, when it developed, this was its front yard. And so now, the way the Hive got approved is that they can build their 6-foot, technically, well, I think they have to drop it on the PDO, but they could build their 6 foot here, 6 foot to here, drop it to 4 feet, and come along this street. So you'd have potentially a 6-foot fence there, a 4-foot fence there, by today's design standards, just due to timing and approvals that took place. And so they would, but they could come with a 6-foot fence right here and right here to create some private area for the lot. So they're actually, it seems like it would be apples and apples, but it's really apples and oranges today. I hope that answered it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's something that seems to come up whenever we have discussions about a development with a private lane. I think Canyon Point's one that we had pretty lengthy discussions about what's the side yard, what's the front yard, blah, blah, blah. And I think that that applies here as well, that the front yard technically is Northwest, everything else is interior, even though the homes on there don't point that way.
Correct.
So, okay. All right, does anybody else have any other, well, okay, so here's the thing, Corey. I remember when we talked about this back in the day, we did talk about fences. I think one of the things we wanted to be sensitive of was that along that property line, the north property line of the Hive and the south property line of the Applewood folks, there was an existing fence there. And I think we wanted to be sensitive to those existing fences and see, you know, because what if somebody had, you know, their grapes growing on that fence, and whose prerogative is it to just come in and rip them out, right? So be sensitive to that type of stuff, but to do that. And then, I don't know. I don't remember talking about going with really tall fences. I could be wrong.
Yeah, the issue that came, the issue that came about was some wanted taller fences.
Yeah.
And so what it came down to is, well, we can't force the existing fence owners to tear down their fence.
Sure.
And the idea, if people along that area felt that the taller fence would benefit them as a property, the idea is that they could eliminate their fence.
Yep.
And that this new 6-foot fence would become their yard, or if it was taller, it could be up to 8 feet. What the commission says, we don't want it to be 8 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet. And so the idea was to work with the property owners, and you would be interested in, if the majority of the property owners, not majority, because you didn't say majority, but if it could be worked out, you would consider a taller fence. What happened in the discussion is it couldn't come to a unified. And so the 6-foot fence that got installed was made sure it was on the Hive's property. And we can't say that you can't have a 6-foot fence on your own property. And so then you had subsequent discussions as they've constructed that fence is, well, what's this little 3 or 4 inch gap? And who's going to take care of it? Because the Hive said, look, we're going to make sure our fence is on our property. We're not going to build it straight, make sure it's on our property. If there's a slight jog, we're not going to worry about it. They'll just have to decide whether they tear down their fence and use our fence as a barrier, or if they want to keep their own fence and have that little gap. But then, after all of that took place, now this grading issue has come up. And so they're saying, look, due to grading, due to drainage, we probably are better off getting a taller fence and and being able to direct the drainage as planned. And the purpose is to not either have a lot owner grade out their property flat and have a little channel, or the other option is a steeper backyard. And they are short backyards, they're 20 feet, so. And their design is all the roof drains in the front yard will drain out to their drainage system. This would be only the surface water from rains that land in the backyard.
So Corey, let me ask about that grading then. I don't remember what it was like when the trailer park was there, but was the trailer park elevated above the other yards to the north?
You guys want to see them? I have pictures.
No, hang on, you'll get a minute, you'll get your turn in a minute. So just wait a minute.
Yeah, you had, I can't say that it was exactly flat, but they were relative to each other in grade.
Yeah,
Now
so
you
then
have-
now we're,
Now you have fill and the placement of the road and things of that nature that have changed how the grading worked.
now was that part of the plan from the beginning, or did that?
No, that happened afterwards. You'll have to ask the applicant
How that happened?
how that happened.
Okay, we'll ask the applicant then. All right.
I did want to just add, because I've paid attention, because it is near my residence, as I've mentioned, and part of the discussion, why there was the discussion for the 8-foot fence versus the 6-foot fence, is if you'll remember, the western portion of this got rezoned, it's a commercial property, and typically when you have a commercial property adjacent to a residential, even a low residential, which this is, you have a buffer, and there is no buffer. And so one of the things you could do to mitigate the absence of a buffer is increase the height of the fence. Similar to like what was done over by the old Dick's Market, where they tore down the Dick's and there's the Colonial Ace hardware store, and there's a precast wall there with the height to it, and then the residential adjacent to it, because they also can't have that greater
No buffer.
landscape buffer there.
Yeah.
So that, I think, was also part of the discussion as to why increase it to the 8-foot, to keep it uniform from 400 west to the frontage road at 8 feet, to mitigate that buffer that couldn't be established.
Yeah.
And then we heard from some applicants about the desire of not having too much shade in their backyard. So there was like the desire to have the shorter fence as well because of their growing and different things. But others who wanted the taller fence due to the buffer as well. So I remember this being a kind of a sticky situation from the beginning, but can you remind us, Corey, did we approve with like, what was the actual directive to the applicant about the fence?
It's listed in your staff report. If you want me to read it out loud, I can.
But I mean, wasn't there an additional, besides what you have here, wasn't there an additional, something told about working with the property owners?
No, that was just a discussion.
That was just verbal, it wasn't actually in the
Correct.
decision? Okay, that's what I was asking for.
Yep.
All right, any other questions for staff?
Yes. When we say fence, does that mean it needs to be a solid fence or an open fence?
Well, that's a great question.
That's
In the case of, and if, there's a lot of complexity. When the hive developed, there was no buffer requirement. So the setback would have been only potentially 8 feet or 10 feet, depending on which side they wanted to pick. And so with the hive development, they committed in the public process, I think they originally proposed a 15-foot, they committed to a 20-foot, so it would have like rear yard to like rear yard, although the RH zone didn't require the 20-foot. And the fence just became a voluntary thing in their design in the PDO plan, because we didn't have a buffer requirement for fencing in the residential high. That ensued a later discussion that the commission brought up and the council considered later, should we have a buffer between residential use types? And it failed. So there's no buffer requirement. So if it was a mandatory buffer requirement, our code says you can do two things: opaque fencing or vegetation to equal that fencing. So they get a choice on whether they do that. But in this case, there's no buffer requirement. The fencing is just simply on their PDO plan, their commitment to define the boundaries of their project, but it's not a buffer
But it
fence.
can't be open fencing, it's gotta be opaque.
You could do, under our code, you could do a rail fence.
Do a chain link fence as passe as they are?
We don't allow, well, under buffer, we don't
With
allow
the
chain link with
PDO.
slats.
would that be allowed in the PDO though,
What?
the chain link?
No, the PDO is the 6-foot vinyl fence. That's what got approved.
Yeah.
Okay,
But if you wanted to step back before, there's no requirement for the fence.
So to clarify, they're requesting 8-foot fence, right?
Well, it'll range from 1 to 3 feet in height, so it's going to range from 7 feet to 9 feet.
Okay, I mean, and I don't know if there's any opportunity to make an adjustment to
And
that.
that's the tall side of the fence due to the grade.
Yeah, I mean, an 8-foot fence is already very tall. A 10-foot fence would be ridiculous. I mean, just for scale, that cove opening there is 8 feet, plus or minus. 10 feet would be absurdly tall. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is there an opportunity to say up to 8 feet rather than up to 10 feet?
Yeah, the code says if you want to go above 6 feet, you can ask the planning commission in this zone to go taller. And then there's a couple of findings you need to be made. So, yeah, you can go up to 10 feet is, I think, the code language. So you could say 6 foot, 7 foot. No, we're going to stick with 6 foot. No, I think 7. Because you're trying to say, one, is there the cause for it? And two, is it in the best interest to do this?
But again, it's not the fence. The fence is the same. The fence is 6 feet. It's the
It's the
the
retaining
the
wall.
retaining wall
retention.
below
Wall
it.
that it sets
It's
on.
the wall, and I think we can ask the applicant when he speaks, but I would imagine he's gonna run a string line, and he's gonna want the fence to be the same elevation from east to west, and it's just the level of the wall that's gonna change depending on how the grades work out in the backyards.
Yeah, even so, the overall height difference from one side to the other will be potentially 10 feet.
I don't think so, because.
9.
If that's what they request, and I don't know if they're
Well,
gonna go for that.
If we don't allow, yeah, that's,
Well, he
It's
said
not,
the
it's
wall
1 to
could
3
only go
feet,
1 to
so
3.
it's 9.
So 9.
9.
Whether 12 inches
I
makes
don't
a
know that that makes a
difference, debatable.
Okay.
can you turn the microphones up a little bit? I can kind of hear you over there, and I don't know if it's easy for everyone to hear. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, any other questions for staff? All right, for everybody's benefit, real quickly, we're going to give time to the applicant to discuss this, ask questions for the commission to ask questions, and then following that, then we will open up the public hearing and give everybody from the public an opportunity to address us. So, let's go ahead and invite the applicant to come forward. If you'd introduce yourself, please.
Yes, my name is Walker Wood, here representing the applicant. Appreciate the opportunity to come before you tonight. I think I'll try to answer some questions and tell you why we're making the request. Certainly would love to hear public comments and can respond to those in addition to yours. So now that we have graded the site and the homes, all the foundations have been poured, the slope in those backyards really is greater than anticipated. When we put in the wall, the private drive that runs east to west, for the storm drain to flow to the west, that road on the very eastern portion that connects to 400 was built up a little bit more than what we anticipated needing to do. So we're still anticipating keeping the same storm drain system in place. And as Corey described, all of the existing storm drain from the homes will flow into the storm drain system out to the private drive and to the west. It's really the retention in the back of the yards that would hit the swell and run west in the backyards. We feel like this would be a better option for both our side and the other, with the way the backyards are a little bit elevated and trying to provide some privacy and some view privacy there as well, and really to make sure that as the drainage in those rear yards can hit that retaining wall and go west on the site. So I don't know that I have a whole bunch to add from what's been discussed, but certainly open to questions and happy to make whatever work with you, and we appreciate you considering this proposal and figuring out what the best solution is.
Let me ask you a question, if you know, before your development started, when the trailer park was there a storm drain system in there at all?
I'm sure there was, but I don't know the details of what that would have been.
Do you know?
There was a lot of private utilities that were inadequate, so I don't know
It's
much drainage installed,
it was an old,
very
it
old.
was old. Okay.
Commissioner Shagrood asked, or kind of was wondering about you gonna do a straight line of the tops of the fence, depending on even where I guess I'm kind of putting words in your mouth, but she asked something similar to that with the retaining wall and the height of the fence, and is it gonna go like this, or is it just gonna stay level?
Yeah, our preference is to keep it more consistent across. Happy to, we can make accommodations if there are the preferences, but the 3 foot on the very east side is where the greatest, the tallest part is, that's right.
So when I do the math, it's 14 feet higher on the east than it is on the west. So that's a big differential. Your finished grade at your top back of curb is 14 feet higher at 400 West than it is at the last house in your development. That's significant. 14 feet is significant. So you're doing this to funnel storm drain water, right? And so the goal is to funnel the storm drain water to the west. And then once it gets past that last house, where is it going?
So there's a retention, I don't know if you can quite see it, in the plans, just to the west of that most western house, there's a retention basin on that side of the home.
And so if you're running, just paint it for me how it's going to work. If you're only editing this portion of the fence, what happens when you get to that swell and the fence goes back down and there is no wall? How do you keep top of your fence uniform?
It's a gradual, the wall gradually decreases in height so that by the time it gets flush with the ground on the western side, where the retention basin is, then it catches there, and the need for that swell isn't the same as it is in those backyards where there's runoff.
Do you foresee the need for a swell throughout the entirety of it, or?
There's a storm drain system on the townhome side, and so there's another basin in part of that commercial side. So the whole site does have a storm drain system. It's just in these backyards, it's its own swell that connects to that specific basin on the west. But there is another system that catches the rest of the storm drain on the site.
So in the backyards, just help me because I'm not
I'm not either, yeah.
The swell, are we talking about like a French drain type of a thing that'll run the length of the back?
Yeah, so it just runs along the base of the current fence, or what would be the wall if this is approved. And it's similarly to the frontage where all of the storm from, called the rooftops, will catch and then connect to underground swell in the road. This is just the kind of reverse of that on the back side, so it just runs right along the base there.
So this is just surface drainage, and when you say swale, it's just the contour of the
Correct.
surface.
That's right.
It's not a pipe, it's not a gutter, it's just there's a bit of a berm as you approach the fence that then directs the water to the west.
Correct, and that's why we felt like this was a better option for us to try to mitigate any runoff on the neighboring parcels as well, is that there's a little bit more substance there to catch it and direct it west.
So there's no infrastructure there, it's just
grading, that's right.
Just grading.
Yes.
Technically, someone could fill it in. 3 residences down the road, he could say, why is this a ditch back here? I'm just going to fill it in.
There are restrictions on what can be done in the backyards in the governing
In your
documents.
CC&Rs.
And the PDO approval. So if somebody did do that, they'd be in violation of the drainage plan. Because that's, the swale is the original design that was approved.
So tell me, can you just walk me through why this happened now? Like you said, it kind of was more than we anticipated. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, I frankly don't have a great answer to that question. I wasn't part of the original approval here and have been more involved on the project it has gone on. This, I think, should have been addressed sooner, and I think that was just a mistake to not realize this at an earlier point in time.
So just
Chair-
to clarify, sorry, go ahead, Corey.
I wanted to say, Chair Daly, if I could ask the question, just from a design perspective, there's multiple ways to think about it, but is there an adverse on the applicant's side to still be uniform, but you do uniform step downs, so it's not so tall? Or a step up, uniform step up, because your tallest is on the east side. So you could go, I don't know where it best fits, but you do 4 lots, drop, goes up, 4 lots, goes up.
Yeah, I think that
I
can,
was going to say a very similar thing, but, you were talking about, say if you were to strike a level line, and at the
Yeah.
top of the fence would follow that. Well, I don't think that's really what's going to happen, because as you pointed out, it's 14 feet higher on one side than the other. The fence is going to follow that slope. So the top of the fence can be a straight line, it just won't be a level straight line,
Yeah.
Right.
right? Is
Right.
that what you envision?
yeah, well,
It will follow the slope of the
it will
property.
follow the slope of the property, that's right. And we're very much open to stepping it if that's more desirable.
I'd rather see it sloped and stepped personally, but either way, it's going to have to change as it goes down.
Right.
Yeah, I just asked from a design, there's multiple ways, because you're balancing the cause, and then you're balancing in the best interest. And so is it best interest to step it, is it, if we're gonna go higher, what's the best interest?
So here's a question. If we don't approve this today, what's your alternative?
So the existing fence still works. I think this is a better solution, so we would have to look at another alternative and figure out how we can come up with a new proposal. If we wanted to change from the existing with the 6-foot fence that has already been approved.
Okay. What kind of retaining wall?
Concrete.
Okay. What happened after the February 24th, 2021 approval? I was here for that discussion. The discussion was the applicant were going to be talking with the neighbors. What were those discussions and why did they fall apart?
Yeah, from what I understand, it was not everyone on the same page, and so to avoid the 8-foot, 6-foot variation, we went ahead and did the 6-foot.
Okay.
Did you reach out to everyone?
From what I understand, but I personally wasn't with the company at the time.
They did reach out, I don't know the level of cooperation and dialogue and collaborative effort, because I've heard mixed messages, but Darlene did reach out and have a couple of meetings, because I would get some texts and emails from individuals. It obviously, for whatever reason, didn't fruit to a change, and so they just went ahead and installed the 6-foot on their property. Some probably felt it was not an amicable decision, and others may have felt like, yeah, we don't want the 8-foot fence. But there was some discussion, it just didn't.
So have you presented this proposed solution to the neighbors?
Say that one more time.
Have you proposed this current solution to the neighbors?
Yeah, so we left a letter on everybody's door to discuss this process. And
Did you hold open houses?
we haven't held an open house meeting.
So you left a letter on the property, anything else?
Well, we had someone, I wasn't the individual, but we had someone go door to door. If they weren't home, they left a letter. If they were, they'd had the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for the applicant? Yes.
Chair
Corey.
Daly, just one more again. It's the design eye going in, so that everybody can have a collaborative discussion and come to a conclusion. One of the other options that I would see is that you can install a small retaining system on each lot and still be able to drop the back grades. Is that the most desirable? Well, it depends on what you're thinking, but you could still drop the grade from the back of the house to the property line through a small middle quarter element within the lot in that 20 feet.
Okay, thanks.
Actually, remind me, is there a drainage system, a land drain system of any sort on the southern portion of this project?
What, the townhome portion? Yes. Yeah, so there's an underground retention, and then there's another retention system on the south side by the office building.
So as Mr. Snyder is suggesting, there's the possibility of installing something similar on the north side to mitigate this instead of the proposed solution.
That's a separate system that's in. So the system on the south side is already been installed as an underground kind of retention of flow. At this point, I don't know that we could go in and install that same type of system in those
Yeah,
backyards.
but I think what I'm trying to say is that you could do a drop down somewhere into the backyard and still keep the 2-foot swell at the 6-foot place.
I understand. Thank you.
Because what you've talked about in the past was that on the north end, north of the office building, there's a retention system up there, but that's handling the street stormwater and everything that comes off the front.
And the townhome side.
And the
yes.
townhome side.
Yes.
But what we're talking about in the backyards of the single-family homes, that doesn't play into that necessarily because that's just,
It's a separate system, so there's a separate retaining pond or area on that north side of
fed
it.
by grading.
Say that one more time.
Just fed by grading?
Correct.
But I think the one between Centerpoint Theater and the town's homes, I think that land is also just fed by grading. Straight from 400 West down between the townhomes.
There is underground retention in that as well.
But there's
Storm
not,
tech system.
yes, and that is located west of the townhomes, not between the townhomes and the Centerpoint Theater.
Correct.
The grading
That's right.
the water that's gonna come between, it's the same scenario but flipped. It's just surface grade with a swell, same as it is in the residential houses. The storm tech system is down in the west, and it's a buried structural system that basically creates lots of cavities so you can hold water and still have structural surface above it. But the actual mechanism that gets the water into that system is just a surface flow swell.
Well, it's twofold in this design, because if you're thinking about just the surface landing on the grass, yes, it's the swell at the surface taking it. But if you're thinking of the streets, the driveways, the parking lot, that swell that's there is too small in its depth, so you have this drainage, underground drainage system that increases the capacity of that
Right,
swell.
in the detention area
Yes,
itself.
yeah, it's in the
But
detention.
But the system that conveys the water to the detention facility in both of these applications, behind the houses and behind the townhomes, is just a swell.
For the yard area.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
To some degree, because there's open space in between each of the town units, that's also heading into the other system. So yes, just the property line area.
But there's not a French drain,
No.
there's not a conveyance system that's
No.
underground, it's all surface water
Yeah.
movement.
So one additional question. When your client decided that it needed to do some grading that was different than what had been planned, did they come back to the city for a pre-approval? How did that work?
I think there's some changes that occur on site when we get approval on the site, so it's not a formal hearing, but yes, the city was apprised of the changes, just that implication on the backside is greater than anticipated, I think.
So Corey, would that have been just the inspector on site that would have been aware of that?
When you come to the infrastructure, likely they adjusted that on the construction drawings with the city engineer. And then the assumption is that the north property line would be handled as designed. And so there were probably some design changes based on the gradient flow. But the assumption that I'm aware of by everybody, because the city engineer spoke to me and they mentioned that, okay, now that you've done this, you still have back here to figure out. And the construction plans were at roughly same grade swells down to the north system. So there was some awareness, but the assumption is you're going to keep to the plan on the other stuff.
Anything else? Any other questions for the applicant? Anything else?
I think so. So, I'll be here.
All right, so let's go ahead now, and we'll give the public an opportunity to speak to this. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started with that. We will give everybody an opportunity to speak. Please keep your comments to this particular discussion here. Keep your comments concise as well. We will, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask those questions. I will jot them down. We'll answer those questions at the end of the public hearing, so this is not going to be a dialogue in that aspect. And then please introduce yourself at the beginning of your comment. So, at this time, I would like to go ahead and open the public hearing and invite anybody who would like to come forward and speak to do so.
I'm gonna come forward because I gotta go. So I just wanted to make sure I got my questions asked.
Go ahead and like I said, go ahead and
My name
ask
is Don Barnes. I live on Applewood. I'm all the way down at the very bottom where all the water drains to on the street currently. My house is like the lowest point of the part of there. So my two questions, one regarding the fence. Since I am directly behind the commercial property, I'm okay with a big giant 10-foot tall fence because I hate that building. Because their lights are going to be on. I have 4 street lights now in my backyard. Those shine directly into my bedroom window at night. So a 10-foot tall fence, that's great because that allows me to still have a dark room at night and then everybody can sleep at my house. So I'm okay if it just went straight across, and I think it would look more professional and it would look nicer in the end rather than a gradual grade down. As you looked from a distance, it would look like the builders just built it wrong. Because if I looked at that as a way across and I looked at that door frame and it slowly went down, I'd be like, wow, they need to learn how to use a level. But then my second question would be is as that runoff comes down from that retaining wall and it works its way down to the retention pond, how can us as residents be assured that that water just doesn't end up in our backyards and making more of a pond, as you say? Because probably 150 years ago, the lake used to be our yards. So what's to stop it from turning into a lake now that they've put the grade up so high on 400 West to keep it from going into those yards? And I think those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I have the opportunity to show anything? Can I connect to your computer?
So, yeah, now,
It's just pictures of the
pictures,
site.
and then could you, when you're done with that, we'd figure out some way to share those pictures so we can.
We need an
I don't know
electronic or
how.
hard copy of whatever you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
I
Thank
don't know
you.
how to share them.
Well, share them up there?
Yeah.
No, we just mean for the
Just put it-
record.
Can I connect my computer to
Do you have a
the?
plug she can
No,
just
I
plug
can't.
into?
Okay, cool. Well, I can be Vanna for a hot second and walk around.
Okay,
So
walk
I'll
around
just kind
and
of give you
then
guys
when
a
you're
couple
No,
of
there's a way
ideas.
to do it, I just don't know how to do it.
And then when you're done, if you could share those electronically, or like Lisa said, then we can include those in the public record.
Okay, great. All right, I will get started. My name is Bridget Fowers. Thank you so much for taking the opportunity to discuss this with everybody. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context to kind of what's been going on and what's been said, and I've really appreciated the conversation because I think it brought up a lot of concerns and questions that we've had that have developed as the site has grown, and some of those concerns I think are key when it comes to talking about the height of the fence as one thing, but then also how the grading has really changed the structural integrity of the entire plan. So what I'll do really quickly is just the first question.
Sorry, just
you
for
guys-
the record, you will have to.
Speak here, walk here?
Yeah, maybe just describe your photograph, show them, but.
Want to use the microphone?
Oh, sure. Oh, now I see. Okay. So for the first part, we were talking about the trailer park and how it used to be adjacent to us. The land, living here for 8 years, it was equal. So here's just a picture. You get to see a deck picture of us working on our deck. But right behind that, you can see that was the trailer that sat right next to us. The land was equal. We had some really good coverage. We did talk about the vines that were on the fence right here. So I've got just a couple of photos, and when I share that with you, there's another one right after this where you'll be able to see that the land was equal. No high rise. And Corey, right here if you want to see. Okay.
And if you
then-
could show the applicant, Chair
Yeah, oh,
Doty,
sorry.
sorry to
Sorry, bud.
interject.
Okay. Just right there. Okay. So then, as the site kind of progressed, what happened was, you can see the fences, the houses are gone in this picture. And then the fence, that chain link fence right there, was a structure that was left. My husband and I ended up tearing that out. It was one of those that was deemed to not be on their property line. We don't believe that it was ours either, but we went ahead and took it down so that we could adjust. You can see the land is pretty equal again on this, and we discussed at that point the swell drain, because there were some concerns about like, where's this water gonna go? So they went ahead and they trenched this swell drain. You can see from my son standing in it, it's about, you know, 1.5 feet deep, which is a little bit like, you know, 1.5 feet, somebody's gonna have that in their backyard. That's not good, but that's what's gonna happen. Now what has happened,
Don't forget the applicant, sorry.
okay, applicant, oh, sorry, there's so many things to manage. Walking. So there that is. So then we watched it grow, and the ground came up substantially. There was probably about 3 feet, 3 to 4 feet of land that was brought in directly behind our house. This is a picture that was taken yesterday with my son in that. Will you stand up for me really quickly? He's about 4 feet. And it's been built up about 4 feet. Now, what's tricky about this is the swell drain should go below my property line so that it does not flow into my property line. The set low point of the swell drain should not be the bottom of my fence. It needs to be below my fence, 2 feet. This right here is equal to my fence. So if they're gonna drop it below my property line, it has to go even 2 feet deeper, which is gonna leave them with about a 5 to 6 foot drop in their backyards, which is not great for anybody.
Don't forget the applicant.
Applicant, I'm sorry, you just need to like kick me when I walk by. So there he is. And then the last part too is kind of talking about the property and the privacy. I was a creeper, I'm in marketing, so this happens more often than not. I see something, I took a picture. These are some construction workers working in the backyard. You can see my 6-foot fence that we put up in place of that chain link fence. I now can see the workers working in the backyard from the knees up. There is like no privacy here. So it may surprise you guys to hear, we are also on board with a taller fence. We would really like to have the privacy built in there. But where I'm really concerned is with that swell and where that land's gonna go and how that's gonna drain. We did have an engineer come and we had him look at it. Well, we have a friend who does some city engineering, and he said that the swell drain is adequate at best in a drought year. And we've been talking about the water running off, but we're not talking about irrigation as well. Individuals are gonna have irrigation going, it will drain back there, somebody leaves their sprinklers on for too long. If my property is the lowest set point, it's gonna dive to that section. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up so you guys could kind of see the use case of what's going on. If you need reference, I think I'm the highest point at this 645 North right here on the corner. I think that that's the highest that has been built up, and it gradually slopes down towards the frontage road. And I think the last thing that I'd just like to call out is, as a neighborhood, we did try and have open dialogue and communication with CW, with the applicant. We had a lot of communication going back and forth with Darlene. We did initially say, yeah, I think everybody is on board as far as we could gather, and others will testament, like maybe add some comments around this, that we would like the higher fence all the way across. I believe it was put in by CW, is just, we wanted to get a 6-foot fence up, and they later, when they saw kind of the ramifications of that, and are now open to kind of raising that fence. But my concern now is that swell drain and how that is going to work, and make sure that nobody on that property along Applewoods gets flooded. Every person, we are on a cement slab, our house is, but everybody who has a basement that's a half basement, I know that they all have sub pumps already, and so they would be getting additional taxing of water if that's rolling onto the property that direction. So that's kind of the only thing that I wanted to bring up. Thank you so much for your time. And did I miss you with any pictures? Okay, all right, I'll make sure that a digital copy is delivered to somebody. Okay. Any questions or things? Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thanks guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Lysenko, and I'm a member of the neighborhood. I wasn't planning to get up here, but when I heard the questions that you were asking about what happened in terms of the fence before and how the neighbors were consulted, I could add a little color, so I thought I would. And I don't know how it helps your decision, but we really are in favor of an 8-foot fence. In fact, we went to the trouble to talk to every neighbor, and we surveyed each person and asked them a couple of things about color, about height, about shade, how important that was. All those details just dropped out, and everybody, all 17 homes, said, yes, give us the 8-foot fence. And communications have been hard. I think there was originally an agreement, no, there was an agreement that if we reached a consensus, that we would come back to the commission and say, yeah, here's our consensus. We knew that an 8-foot fence would require approval. And so when we got to the point of actually talking with the applicant about this, that sort of became a barrier. And they said, look, we really don't want to go back to the city because it's going to take permission. And they seem to think that the 6-foot fence was the way to go. And so we didn't feel like, you know, the discussion was carried forward the way that we thought the city had agreed for it to happen. But we sort of just let it happen because we didn't feel like we had an alternative. So we actually welcome the opportunity now to, I guess, have a voice and say that the consensus of 8-foot, every single neighbor would like an 8-foot fence. In fact, some of them would love a 10-foot fence. The sense is that the building is really, really tall, and it's literally 6 feet away from the property lines. And so, you know, Zahn is absolutely right. It's like a big, big commercial building right in front of his bedroom. Those 4 lots that are kind of right before, 5 lots right before the bend in the road, those lots are right in the middle of industrial lighting all night long, and all day as well. So the taller the fence from the neighbor's perspective, the better. Does that help answer your questions? Can I provide any more color on that? Perfect. Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Kathy Rolfing. My husband, Alan, we've lived here 43 years in Centerville, and I just have a concern. When CW put up that fence in March, we acquired it. We know it's not our fence. It's not our property. We like the fence. Great, no issues. We took down our old fence. It had been up there for 40 years. Took it down, no problem. Yard looks great. We've taken good care of it. 4 weeks ago, a gentleman came by our home with a letter just telling us that the arborist was coming to cut the trees along the property line. No problem, I was out there. He showed me the paper. I took it, and then he happened to say, oh, by the way, we're going to be taking down the fence along the back. I go, you're kidding me. I said, come back here and show me. He went in the back, he told me they were going to take down the fence, put up a concrete wall, and then put another fence on top. Well, I was concerned because we have a dog, we have a pond, we have people in that neighborhood that if that fence comes down, their yard is exposed. So anyway, I called CW, talked to them, and they said, we'll treat your yard with utmost respect. So the 16th comes along, we go out in our backyard, and the fence is gone. Fence is gone all the way from east and west in Centerville. We're like, what the heck is going on here? What are we supposed to be doing? There were 4 families. We have one next door to us, have 2 kids and a little dog. And the new home in front of them with 4 kids living right there where the construction site is. We have 3 kids next door to us, and a gentleman a couple ways, he has a dog. He just came home from work just in time to notice the backyard was down. And a gentleman was there cutting the post with a saw, and the dog was there and saw these workers, and the guy was with his saw pointing it at the gentleman's dog. If he had known, and we did not get any notification, what day and how to be prepared and what they were going to do for those of us whose yard now is exposed. You got In-N-Out Burger, you got McDonald's, you got the construction, you got all these people going to be exposed to our backyard. We've never had our backyard exposed. So they came along and put a little orange fence along. Well, to me, why would you take down that fence and leave us like that when it hasn't even been approved? We want communication. We want respect. We've been there and paid taxes for 40-plus years. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Well, my name's Ryan Fowers. I live at 645. Bridget's my wife. I'm going to echo what Jonathan said a little bit. The picture was kind of painted that us as neighbors couldn't come to agreement on the height of the fence, which just isn't the case. There's a few things that have just been painted in a little different picture. We have just a white vinyl fence running from east to west, and there's some spots where it's inches between the two. There's also spots where you don't measure it in inches, where it's like closer to feet, like a foot plus. And so I can walk down it shoulders wide. And that's more than just inches, that's a small alleyway in my mind. Which in my mind, it's a danger. And it looks poor, and the weeds are already growing up between the fence. Well, the fence is gone now, so I guess it's no longer growing between the fences, it's just growing there. So that's definitely a concern. The swell drain is a concern for me. And I've sent emails in the beginning of this to Dane and Darlene, and I can honestly say that CW has never reached out to me, and I've reached out to them on multiple occasions, and I've CC'd Corey on most of the communication. I've made an effort to communicate and meet 50-50, and it just hasn't happened. They said they knocked on our door and left a piece of paper. That did not happen. We didn't have anything left on. So that our doorway, this is news to us tonight. The swell drain, I just want to just kind of point out that retaining wall doesn't equal drainage. Retainment doesn't equal drainage. And so I know we're talking about surface water. I'm a little bit concerned about the groundwater at this point. Because like my wife showed, my son who's 51 inches can stand in the drain, which I think that was kind of painted as a small thing, but it's deep. And so I'm concerned. Just a little bit of background, I grew up on a farm and we irrigated, and I'm very familiar with how groundwater works, and I'm just concerned that if the swell drain is 4 to 5 feet higher than where I'm at, the groundwater is always going to go to the lowest point. So if there's a shallow well and a deep well, the water ends in the deep well. And as high as they've built that up, my lot's now the deep well, when talking about groundwater. Surface water, it's not just the runoff from rain. I think it's been mentioned that there's going to be irrigation and there's going to be water there. I hope it doesn't end up in my yard, but I'm concerned that it's going to. And so just a few questions I had, a few comments. Thanks.
I'm Alan Rolfing. I'm at 567 Applewood. My wife Kathy already spoke, but I just wanted to bring up a couple other facts. I came out when I saw, first of all, when they put the fence in, I was tickled that we got a nice fence. It was good material. It was installed nice. Would have rather had a 30-foot fence, but we got a 6-foot fence. It was very nice. I took our fence down and landscaped to it, When I say I landscaped to it, I brought in rock, flagstones, I brought in bark, I brought in gravel, and landscaped to the new property line. I've extended the sides so that the dog couldn't get out and kids couldn't get into my koi pond. Spent a lot of time making it right, and came out to find the gentlemen out there taking the boards down, and I asked, "What are you doing?" Because we hadn't been told about this fence coming down. And unfortunately, the gentleman from the fence company didn't speak English, so they couldn't convey what they were doing, but I finally found their supervisor. They told me they're taking the fence down and putting in a cement retaining wall that will be about 3 feet tall, and they'll put the fence back on top of that. Okay, that's great. I'm glad we're getting a retaining wall, but I put all this landscape in, and I don't really want to lose it. If you're digging a hole here, I'm going to lose all of this bark and gravel and stone. So let me grab a rake and start raking this back and getting it prepped for you to do your thing. Well, there's not a hurry because we haven't even had approval from the city yet. And so like, well, why are you taking the fence down then until you get approval? But at any rate, they did. And by the way, a point of reference to CW, when you put the fence back up, you're going to want to maintain the orientation you had when you took it down, because the south side will be more faded than the north side, and if you stagger them when you put them back up, it's going to look like a checkerboard. So just a point of reference there. But we were in agreement on an 8-foot fence initially. As a matter of fact, if you wanted to put in a 20-foot cement sound barrier along the freeway type fence, I'd be thrilled with that as well. But at any rate, appreciate the efforts to get this done right, and I don't really want to have to landscape a third time, so thanks for your consideration.
Good evening, I'm Spencer Hurley. I've only been a Centerville resident now for almost 3 years. Love my neighborhood, all my great neighbors. When I moved in, we had a trailer park behind us, and when I heard the land was getting developed, that was good news to me. Sad for the people that live there, but it was a good improvement. I will echo Alan's sentiments that the fence was really nice, and I was happy to see such a high quality fence be installed. And I too landscaped to the back, extended the property from where it was to the fence a little bit and put some money into that and some hard work. And I also raked back. That orange temporary fence was put up the next day, so it was done quickly. But for that afternoon, so probably about, I'd say it was about maybe 1 in the afternoon until the next morning, my property was open, and my 2 small children and our dog could easily just run into the construction site. So that was a definite safety concern. If there is any modifications done to something like that for safety reasons, obviously Alan's got a pond, and obviously there's construction on the other side. It is nice to have a wall there, not just for privacy's sake, but also for safety's sake. So that's my thing, is as long as there's work being done, it should be done through the auspices of safety. Additionally, from the drainage perspective, I don't know very much about irrigation or drainage, but what I've noticed, and Alan helped me out with this as well, there is a large incline that continues steadily from east to west. So my property being on the further west side, there's about maybe a 4 to 5 foot increase in height from my backyard to the backyard of the person that's now behind me. And it just makes sense to me that all that water is going to start filling in that ditch. And I noticed that when they installed the fence, underneath the fence there's about like a 2-inch gap between the bottom of the vinyl and where the ground level is. And anytime I tried to put mulch or anything like that, it would fall through. Once they ripped out the fence, I could see why. There's a massive ditch there, and all that can easily fill with snow and water. So I'm not sure what that does to the fence or my property, but the irrigation for me and the safety are my 2 primary concerns. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ellen McConkey, and I live on the frontage road, the only one along that fence that lives on the frontage road. And I was not real pleased that we were getting a great big building right next to me and that they had gone commercial. But when they put in the fence was fine. They did dig into my yard, and now, like, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Spencer. Like Spencer, I have a place between the fence and my yard, and things just fall down there. So I would really like to see if they could put the cement all the way to the sidewalk on Frontage Road, so that it would have a definite barrier, instead of trying to figure out how I can fence that so that my yard doesn't keep sloughing off into their drainage. But the 10-foot fence would be great. Thank you.
All right. I think everybody's had a chance to speak that is here. That's great. I always like the 100% participation.
Will didn't get to
Yeah,
speak.
Will.
Are you gonna? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You can't say 100%. I'm a literal person.
Adult participation,
Every
100% adult.
100% adult participation.
I'm not an adult.
Okay. Given that, I will go ahead and close the public hearing. I thank you all for your comments. It's not something that's, easy to do. Sometimes people don't like speaking in public, but we really appreciate hearing from you, especially the neighbors and the affected properties. So, all right, at this time, a couple of questions. Well, not very many questions that I wrote down out of this whole thing, but definitely some related themes here. And I don't know how to address this one necessarily, but,
Don't we let the applicant address first, or?
well, do we want to answer questions first or let the applicant address the questions? You can do it either way. Okay, listen, here's
As long
the
as the
thing.
applicant has the last word.
Yeah, we're going to give the applicant a chance to speak. Don't worry about that. Well, why don't we do this? Let's turn the time back over to the applicant. And I think some of the main themes that I heard here were certainly drainage. There's a concern about drainage, so if there's anything additional that you'd like to address as far as how you're going to, ensure that each property drains itself, or that you drain yourself. And then also maybe just talk a little bit more about, I heard a lot about communication and planning and, helping to describe what's going to happen going forward here, as well as some concerns about a big gigantic hole, which I guess in theory a retaining wall would take care of the hole. Right? So, anyway, if you'd like to go ahead and come forward and address those issues.
Sure. Yeah, I apologize for the poor communication. I don't have any excuses for that. There's nothing I can say that would satisfy the neighborhood. You're impacted. I'm sure you've been told certain things. I don't have any good excuse for you. We've had some turnover on the site, so there's been changes in who's represented it. I've learned about some things for the first time tonight myself, and I can't say anything to help you feel like we did our duty in communication, but clearly that's been a concern, and I apologize for that, but it is a frustrating issue, I know. And I'm committed. I'll remain on this. I've got my contact info to share with you. I don't know who you've reached out to, but I'll be the main point of contact going forward. We have superintendents on the site that are part of our company, but I sit right across the freeway in that office, and I'm there every day, and would love to be, if you have any frustrations with any of it, would love to have you have a direct line of communication for us. Similar concepts with communication on the height of the wall. I didn't hear much about concerns there, and that there was some uniformity. I wasn't in those discussions, but regardless, there was a breakdown in communications, and we've clearly not held up our end of the bargain with just being open and transparent, and I again, apologize for that and know we can do better there. The drainage is more of a technical question. We have professional engineered studies that will make sure we comply with. I can't stand here today and tell you the specifics of how that will work, but I do know that in order for us to be approved through engineering and for us to be approved, we have to have those professionals know how that will all work, and we're obviously committed to doing that. I'm not able to share more specifics about what the drainage would look like other than that original plan that was approved. We would make sure is still sufficient for anything that is modified out on site. I've got a lot of notes that I heard tonight that we can do better. Even the temp fence, that one overnight was unacceptable as well. That should have been up same day. So again, I know that this isn't satisfactory, but I acknowledge that we've left some room for improvement and a long process while we built this out, and I will be, I know I've heard a couple of individuals at our company brought up, I'll be the main point of contact for the community and going forward and try to address this and be better about how we can, we recognize the impact on a shared property line, and I would have the same concerns that I heard voiced tonight too.
Are you guys still planning on occupying that office building?
Yes.
Bill?
Yeah, we're anticipating moving in there in December.
In December?
Yes. Yeah. And it'll be a sole office. It'll only be our office. It won't be leased out to different groups, but we will plan on moving in December.
I just have a question. With that big ditch, would that be filled in with the retaining wall? Because I mean, that's annoying for the new houses too. I mean, that's a big thing.
For
Would
sure,
that be
yes. Yeah, the
more
final
filled
grading
in
has
or-
not occurred in that rear yard. So what the pictures I saw, that's not how it will be delivered. Part of it will depend on what decision is made tonight, but that will get final graded before the landscaping is installed and that gets delivered as final.
And what's the rationale for asking for permission for only this segment and not the segment all the way down to the sidewalk road to the west?
Because of that retention system, that it changes as you go down along the road. So the backyards of the single-family homes are flowing in, and then it's just that one road. So we don't continue to have any runoff from homes. There's certainly runoff, but there's another retention that's there that isn't as large because it's not as big of a basin that's catching everything going from east to west, if that makes sense.
Sure. My concern is directed towards the comments that have been raised about privacy, lighting, buffering, etc.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if that has been talked about in your organization and what your solution could or would be.
Sure, I don't know that a concrete makes sense. I mean, I
No,
did.
I'm not asking for concrete, sorry.
But additional panels in height, yeah, I think the composite fence that we've constructed is one that isn't a precast. You just set up, you stack the panels on top of each other, and so the additional height can be accommodated if we hear enough, which I've heard tonight, that there's a desire for increased height throughout.
Right, my question is directed at this. It's my understanding that your application is limited in scope. And unless you expand the scope of your application, our decision today would either have to expand that or else you would have to ask to expand that if you're going to put in a fence above 6 feet, the whole length.
Okay, is that, just to confirm, I don't want to question you, because I want to make sure I understand this. Is that accurate, Corey? If we want to go above 6, we need planning commission approval to do that?
What I think is that you're only asking for proportional height increase, proportional to the property, and the question is either you can modify your application to address the remaining portion and whether a taller fence is going to go there, or whether the commission can expand the breadth of your application. And I think that's the two issues that I can address.
The intent of my question is not to compel you to action, it's to ask, has that analysis been done with your organization? Does your organization recognize that there may or may not be additional issues besides drainage here? And that fencing, if we're going to address fencing, I don't know if piecemeal is the correct approach.
Sure. I've certainly learned tonight that there are, I agree with you. So no, we didn't come tonight knowing what I know now. So that was why we made the application that we did, to specifically address that section. But clearly there's an appetite and some desire for the full length, not just at the end of the single-family homes.
So to that point, that's a good question, is that, Corey, the PDO says, here's what the fence is gonna be.
6 feet.
Yep. The application is to adjust this section. So if they wanna go back and take some of this feedback into account, that's,
Yeah, I mean, the one option is, and it's up to the applicant, they could simply just say, I've heard additional information, I'd like to address it, please table it, and I'll come back to another meeting to discuss it. The other option is I'd like to move forward with this section, we'll go back and discuss it and see if we come back and do a second application to expand it. But I would, the third option that could be on the table, and I would give caution to the commission, is there's, and I think you mentioned it, compelling the other half is not an option on the table.
no. So, yeah, let me ask you this then. You know, from hearing Corey talk about that, I think, you know, that option of tabling might actually be a good option here to give you opportunity to go and have some town hall meetings or whatever else it needs to be with some of the applicants. Because we've heard from, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 homes, but there's apparently 17. So it might be a good opportunity for you to go and spend some more time to make sure that you get all the details addressed and whatnot. So if we were to table this, give you an opportunity to speak to the homeowners, hammer out all the details, get the nitty-gritty figured out, work with Corey on expanding that application, is that something that would work for you?
Yeah, let me just bring up one additional consideration. So
Sure.
the section we're proposing are individually platted lots that we will sell off. The HOA will maintain everything further west. So we do have several contracts that are set to close on those homes, which is why we'd like this resolved, being that they're planning on moving into a house that is on a specified date. So I guess I have a question back, and part of this is for Corey. Can we modify our application tonight to allow the duration, the full length of fence to follow the same request, that it can be up? Because we didn't make a specific request other than we want to be able to build up to 9 feet. So can we modify the application tonight, or if not, can we do a separate one?
It would be difficult. I mean, it sounds simplistic, but there's always the no good deed goes unpunished issue. Because there is, from my perspective of staff, what I would recommend to the commission is to add that tonight would be difficult for staff to adequately respond to, because I think you have a couple of issues here. If the grade dies out, how is that managed with the taller fence? Which is probably, an engineer and enough money can solve a lot of problems, I get it. But we also have the issue of the detention basin, what's its grade level?
Yeah,
and
I'm concerned about that.
I would want to make sure the city engineer feels, and this is why my conditions of approval crafted what they were. You submitted an engineering plan specific to that section, but in staff's recommendation is if the commission went with it, there's a condition that says, yeah, but we got to run that by the city engineer to make sure, we're going to need to run that by the building official, because the building code kicks in at 7 feet or higher. You're aware of that. And so now we have some structural issues onto you, and I think the structural issues are different on a concrete wall versus the structural issues that are with a 8-foot or 9-foot, just a vinyl post and structural. So could we do it? I feel uncomfortable in that sense. I would say, if you want to withdraw not withdraw, that's a wrong term.
Not withdraw.
Hold off and go study that and come back at the next meeting. I think the commission can give us that direction to keep you preserved for the next meeting, so it's not kick the can down the road to multiple meetings and quickly address that issue.
I think to Corey's point, the grading plans that we have, the grading plans that we received don't include that west end of the property. So from our perspective, even as a commission, I don't think we're prepared to talk about that west end of the property right now either. So
my view is, if we want to consider the west end, and again, this is a collaborative because it's not a compelling issue, it's the issue of how you want to handle all of that you've heard, is that they could table it to the next meeting. We could schedule you on there, and then we just have to fast and furious get new plans corrected, back into the staff, and get you on to the next meeting. And then they can make a decision there. My worry about that, if there's a con to it, is that I think Chair Daley made the right assumption. Okay, we've got 3 or 4 neighbors, but we don't have a 17. And so the answer of getting the next meeting a full 8-foot fence, when there may be individuals that bring up different issues against it, there's no guarantee that all those changes would result in an affirmative decision.
Yeah, and I think, part of the reason why I bring that up on that one is not that I don't believe Mr. Lysenko, because he seems like a really believable guy, but, no, I say that in all seriousness, but, anyway, but yeah, there's a concept of hearsay, right? So we don't know for sure. It's only, we can
Well,
only
and more
really take
than
into
that,
account what we do.
legally, if these are affecting the houses west, we have to
change the notice, yeah.
We have to change our notice, and we can't proceed unless the public has been fully noticed, so that's,
Yeah, at that
that's what I
point,
think
at
is
that,
the main
at that
problem.
point, we satisfied the notice requirements, but then they'd have to return the courtesy notice out to the site.
Yeah.
I do agree with that point of providing notice, but the ordinances do not require the developer to contact the neighbors
Yeah.
individually. It would be a courtesy only. Just
Yeah.
want to make sure that is not a legal requirement that we can impose on the developer.
Yeah.
Just a reminder.
However,
Thanks, Lisa.
But don't we have to have the public notice for what is being affected, and right now
Yeah,
it's just
conceptual,
this much?
conceptual site plan is a public hearing, arguably.
so I think that leads back to the issue that they're driving the application to some degree about closing and contracts. The issue is, from my perspective, they could put in a contract to be decided, are you okay with an 8-foot wall if we get approved? But that's their private business to decide
Yeah,
how
I
to
was gonna
close the
say,
contract.
I'm generally sympathetic to, working with developers and getting things done quickly, but in this case, I'm not feeling too sympathetic on this one because you kind of put yourself in its own position by changing what was originally planned, right? So,
But you could ask to just say, I would like a decision if possible tonight on this aspect.
yeah, okay, so that's the thing. We can talk about the east end only. We can table it. You can go back to Corey and add the west end to it and come back to us. Or, well, if we talk about just the east end, then you'd have to come back later for the west end. if you wanna do
Or
that as
the
well.
east end may not pass too.
Right, so.
I'm just saying, like, there's potential tonight for a lot of situations.
So there's some stuff to consider. I can't speak for the rest of the commissioners up here, but for me, if I were you, I'd go for, let's table it, let's take it offline, talk about it, and come back.
Yeah, I think that's certainly both the commission and just in good faith, we would like to kind of remedy what we can with what we're proposing.
Sure.
And kind of reconnecting with the neighborhood and to the extent we let that go.
And Corey's right, like if you're knocking on Corey's door tomorrow morning, get things going, we can get it back by the next meeting. So we can get this done without too much of a delay.
Sounds like the neighborhood also has a pretty robust system of communicating with each other, and they can probably, if you really, in good faith, reaching out to them, they can probably gather together and communicate back as well.
Yep.
So is that okay if we?
Yeah, do I need to make that request?
Nope.
I think so, yes, but I'm fully supportive of moving forward with a tabling decision tonight.
Just make sure that makes it in minutes.
I think he did make the request.
To table?
Yeah,
Oh, okay, well, we're still gonna vote on it.
yeah, whether to
Just
table or
wanted in the
not.
record that the applicant requested a table.
Okay.
So all technical, yes, that's fine, if it is an applicant request, either way is fine.
Okay.
I think I have a path forward on how to
Yes.
make this.
Without too much delay. Yeah. Any other
We're
questions?
incentivized, and so are the neighbors who are exposed right now with the temp fence. We'll talk about how to remedy that in the meantime, but yeah, we're incentivized to move quickly.
So I have an additional question, or perhaps a request. When you come back, will you please be ready to answer in greater detail why the grading was changed?
Yes.
Yeah,
And let me speak bluntly. Flat lots are easier to sell and they sell for more, is my understanding. I'm not sure I'm convinced yet why the grading was changed and whether or not it was incentivized in order to get flat lots in violation of the prior plan. I'd like you to come in with some explanation about why this happened. It shouldn't have happened.
And, yeah, and if that means bring an engineer, then maybe bring an engineer.
Yep.
Well,
That's what I was gonna add. You just jumped on the gun. I was
Sorry.
gonna say that
Well,
same thing. I
because-
give you some directive, yeah.
At
Like,
some point, it was mentioned, well, we maybe had to make a adjustment on site, and then someone said, well, that adjustment would have had to have been approved. If it was, I'd like to see who approved it.
I would like to see approval of that as well.
Well, Corey, we all know how this works. When they came in with those original documents to get this development approved, there were engineered plans submitted, reviewed, stamped, and approved. They worked on paper. There was no need to change it. It functioned according to the grading, contours, drainage, et cetera. Somebody checked all that, ran the calculations, approved it. So I don't really buy the idea that there was just a big surprise on site that, oops. they had to
I would
change it all.
agree that on paper it worked, and there's some preliminary pothole construction to try to tie in. I wasn't a part of that decision, but I also know in the development, your final tie-ins generally get exposed when you dig. And that's when you really know where the rubber's hitting the road. Because you can have, our water line says it's 6 feet by our records. Somebody put it in and they go out and actually expose it finally.
But tying into a water line isn't going to change the finish grade of your
But tying the
street.
storm drain will.
Well,
I
so-
agree with,
but we're
I
talking about
agree.
surface tension.
I agree,
Not
though.
underground.
These plans are detailed to the fraction of a foot to flow and work. When you look at the grading plan,
Yeah, I understand,
say-
I understand they do a good job to the fraction of the foot. I'm just gonna be honest with you. Construction plans change in the field frequently.
sure, but listen, Corey, love what you do. Matt's an actual engineer over here.
I understand that.
Anyway.
Either way, my intent is that I want you to come up with a better answer because I don't feel like we're getting the full picture.
Sure.
And it may be entirely innocent and justified. It may not. Come in ready to talk about it, please.
Noted. Yeah.
I'd also like to direct you to answer how the change that has occurred affects the previous drainage plan, because there was a plan in place, the plan was not followed, and the plan in place was, the drainage plan that was on paper was dependent upon the grading plan. So now we have a totally different grading, and how is that affecting the drainage? We have no idea at this point because it has changed so much. So I want you to also come prepared to address how the current grading affects the paper drainage that we have and
Right.
whether that's gonna, that will affect my
I
decision
mean,
as well.
if I were just guessing, then again, I'm surmising, you're really probably dealing most likely with what they expected the excavation amount to occur and the amount to stay and the amount to be shipped and.
But see, to that point, Mr. Fowers made a point about how the low well gets all the water, the high well doesn't, and suddenly they became the low well, whereas before maybe they were.
Yeah, but I think he was talking about groundwater, and groundwater is
No.
9 feet below.
Well,
He also
not in this area, it's not
irrigation
nine-
water as well.
7 to 9 feet is the soil study one.
there's gonna be seepage here,
Yeah, there's
right?
gonna be
There's gonna be seepage.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel you're going too far.
Well, but Corey, what
Yeah.
we're talking about here.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is when you go to the point that you're trying to account for, I agree with the idea of how did this happen? But the issue is not to go back and redesign the development, wherever the mistakes may be. The issue is they're requesting, and you may approve a taller fence. And so to say, I'm not going to give you a taller fence based on some engineering error in the past, is really irrelevant, because they could have constructed it all just as is and still come back in for a taller fence if they wanted to, and you would be in the same place of going, well, do we want it? What's the interest? And so I agree with you that turning the drainage into the motivation is probably not the best place to give the community good and the city's best interest. The issue is the taller fence is being requested for some buffering and some visual, and the issue that's at hand is, okay, if you go that taller fence, can we still drain it? That's all that it should be focused on.
I know, Corey, but I think that the point here is the default is to say, we've already approved a certain plan. The default is to say, let's stick with the plan that's already been approved.
And that's what I'm advising you. I'm saying,
Sure.
if you're going to tie it into these other things as your denial, no,
No,
that's,
we're
not denial, but the justification, don't. Don't turn it into that.
But we need
Turn
to-
it into the requesting a fence, they're looking for the privacy, and the issue is we think we can do a better drainage along those lots there.
But the
But we need to-
applicant also said he felt the retaining wall would funnel the water better than the swell. He brought up the drainage issue.
No, the swell's exactly the same.
But we need to be able to understand
You
the
can, you could do,
ramifications of
you
the
could
change.
build you could build the swell today just fine.
But that's not what
It
the applicant
changes, it
wants to
changes
do.
how they want to grade the backyard, agreed.
Sure.
But they can do the drainage today as is. So the issue is the
I don't think he
laser
can,
focus on the
because
drainage. Yes, they can, because what you're seeing is the fill, and they'll have to take all that fill off and ship it off.
They're gonna take all the fill and then expose all their foundations of their poured.
No, you only have to go 6 feet out.
But the swale doesn't necessarily stay the same. If you put the
It just goes up higher.
right, and then.
But they can take out all of that backyard right now, because right now it's been leveled off. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing the leveling
I
off.
think they could take the grade existing at the fence line with the residents on Applewood and slope it back down to the new houses. I
No,
don't think
it would slope up to the new houses.
Which would still create a problem for the existing homes to the north. But, so.
No, it doesn't create a problem because it would be captured by the same drainage channel that was being planned. It's just that they don't have a flat yard now.
I understand what you're saying, Corey, is either way, you're relying on surface drainage.
Right.
And that's what the swale does, is it directs that surface drainage to the west. That would be happening regardless.
Correct.
Either it happens higher, or it happens lower.
Correct.
That's the drainage plan, regardless.
And so the issue for drainage from the staff perspective is we just want to make sure that when you raise that with the wall, it's the issue of the seepage. Are they going to put in a liner barrier down low at the bottom of the wall? Is it a gravel base that handles it because the soil can percolate down? That's all the engineering issue is.
Sure.
But to try to tie back to, okay, there was this mistake back here, and I'm going to use that as a justification of whether you're going to have a taller fence or not, I'm saying don't go that far.
Okay, well, I think back to Commissioner Kerr's point, be prepared to talk about that and the ramifications of the rest of this stuff, so.
How can you design it so it's still functional from the original grading plan?
Yeah.
And if you can design it to the original grading plan, we might want to see that. And if you can't, we want to know why you can't.
That's where I was trying to head.
Yeah, that's the question that I was.
That's a better articulation, sorry
That's a
about
better way to say that.
We may have been a little bit forceful, but yes, we
I
want to know
think
the why.
I understood what you were going for, yes.
And if not, this meeting's on YouTube, go back and watch it.
So the original plan, I wasn't here during the original time. Were the houses, were they built up more now compared to what the original plan was, and that's why we're having the big decline? So they were built up, and then they had to figure out how to deal with all of the slopage down into the Applewood house?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is they want to flatten out the backyard lot,
Make it less steep.
make it less steep. That's,
Any other questions for the applicant, because it's still technically.
sorry to be so
it's
pushy,
fine.
I just don't want to get out of the bounds of the ordinance.
I have one more clarification, and I think this is kind of for a lot of the residents as well, but I just want to clarify. And then we're saying 8 or 9 foot fence, whichever it is. Let's just say 8-foot fence for discussion. That's an 8-foot fence as measured from the new development side, right? So the backyard of these new houses to the top of that fence is 8 feet. Is that what we're talking about here?
Not my understanding. My understanding is the height, the ultimate height on the low side is the 9 feet.
Okay, so as measured from the
Opposing
existing
property.
lower properties,
Yeah.
9 feet.
And that's the way our code requires the calculation up to 10 feet.
Okay.
As a full structure. wall plus fence.
Well, there's a couple of
that's my
criteria
question.
in terms of how you calculate if there's varying grade of a fence.
Right.
So we're just, yeah, the maximum they could go with planning commission authority would be 10 feet anyway with that kind of calculation.
So what we're gonna have is we're gonna have a retaining wall, plus or minus 3 feet. We're gonna have a fence on top of that. Let's call it 6 feet. The sum total of that is 9 feet. So that's what we're looking at basically.
Yes.
This is what I want to clarify.
Yes.
Low side. From the low side.
Yeah.
So the
From
code
the high
says,
side, it's more like a 6-foot fence.
when a difference in grade exists on either side of a fence or wall, the height of the fence or wall shall be measured from A, the average elevation of the finished grade of the adjoining properties at the fence line, or if excavated or filled at the native elevation.
Native.
So the native elevations in this
Before they
side,
added
the
fill.
Applewood side.
Yeah, the native will end up showing up on the north side of the fence.
And the planning commission has the authority to approve a fence height, wall, similar structure not to exceed 10 feet. So, given that calculation is the way I read the code.
But, I mean, that makes all the difference to me, because then if we say a 10-foot fence is approved, you know.
Up to.
That makes a lot, yeah, up
It's
to.
going to be up to,
See,
if that's what you want. Or
That's
up to
10
8.
feet from the low side, it's only gonna be, 6 or 7 feet from the high side.
Counting for the swell, if you wanted to measure the base of the swell.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. All right, let's do this then. I will make a motion to table this application at the applicant's request to a future meeting, hopefully the next meeting. I think that's all I need to do, right?
To the next meeting, is that what you said?
To the next meeting?
Yeah,
Yeah, let's
that's
say to the
helpful.
next meeting.
Second or anything? Do we have to second and vote on that second?
Yeah. Did you second that, Becky?
Yes, I did.
Great, thanks. Let's just go all together on this one. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your input. We look forward to seeing you again.
And thank you to the applicant for
Thank you for
your work.
working with us. Okay, let's move on then to the next item on our agenda, which has also been scheduled for a public hearing. This is a landscaping regulation zone text amendment, legislative decision. We'll turn the time over to Corey for this one.
Yay, I don't plan on a lot of dialogue from my perspective. I plan on questions from my perspective. We talked about landscaping briefly in a different meeting. The council gave us direction to do some things to
When you
improve our...
weren't here, Kevin, we were so fast, right?
What's that?
Seriously, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
When he wasn't here.
And so we talked about, the council talked about asking us to look at some waterways. So previously, I showed you a lot of various codes and talking about landscaping. My impression from that discussion is there wasn't, one, from my perspective, a holistic need to upend our landscaping ordinance because we don't require turf to begin with. It's just plantings. We do have the west side xeriscaping issue. We had some discussion about water features in there. I didn't put that in there because I think they'll either do them if they want to do it or they won't do it if they don't want to do it because none of the requirements for water features were mandatory. So I left that out. And so your major highlights are, we talked about the amount of landscaping that's required for the area devotion. So the current code is 75%. There were opinions that maybe go to 60%. And I'm just going to say, I'm going to see if I can lowball you and put it at 50%. So you can have that discussion, and I can answer kind of why I think the 50% is there. The other thing that I added to the ordinance is to be very explicit, because we don't say the use of turf or not turf. And given state law and your recent discussion with, not your recent discussion in the media about that HOA in Tooele, and you put in all artificial grass and created a problem. And so I know, tangent. So I wanted us to be able to say, look, we're not requiring turf as a city. And so we're actually going to tell you expansive, satisfying your ordinance with grass is not what we're looking for. It's not what we want. Adding decorative gravel now to be used rather than waiting for a landscape person to tell us it's okay to use it. And then the idea is to take, we had the west side where we said, look, you don't have secondary water over there, so we really want to encourage xeriscaping. Nobody actually does true xeriscaping. It's all drought tolerant over there. And so if you do xeriscaping over there rather than drought tolerant, it has to be a specific architect. And I think we should come over this side that if we're creating landscaping plans and it's not turf, we want some good designs out of your landscaping. And there's a lot of individuals that don't really know landscape design. And so when we're dealing with our non-residential properties, I just wanted to put in there, yeah, we want a landscape architect to look at your plan and take care of things. So I put that in there. So that's really the gist
Cool.
of the changes.
So Corey, I can appreciate your adding I guess whatever it is, the expansive area use of water resource intensive turf and grasses shall be avoided. You know, that's more, there's no teeth in that, or no, it's not very quantifiable, just a direction type of a thing, right?
I just use
Shall is a T.
Well, shall,
Right, lawyer, shall.
I get it, but.
Not when you couple it with wishy-washy.
I mean, it's,
We have a lot of wishy-washy languages in
I
the
know,
ordinance.
I actually have no objection to this.
I mean, as long as, no, listen, the only
We're just
reason
gonna
I
get into
bring this up.
arguments about what expansive area means.
Well, okay, there's a lot of that too, expansive and whatever. As long as we understand that it's more just kind of this, let's just be directionally consistent rather than here's a quantifiable type of a thing, right?
So is this for residential?
No,
That
commercial.
expensive? Okay, it's for commercial.
No, this is for commercial
It's for
stuff.
commercial industrial
Can I
landscaping.
ask a question?
Hmm?
Would this ordinance apply to our cemetery? I know that Centerville has an interest in acquiring more land to build a new cemetery. And in my opinion, a cemetery would be an expansive area of grass. One of your best options in a cemetery is grass because of the nature of how the cemetery is managed and used
Right.
and the
You have
foot
to
traffic.
You have
and
to disturb it.
You have to disturb it frequently and the grass, so I guess I'm trying to say is, would this change in this ordinance prohibit the city from having grass in the new cemetery?
I'm looking it up right now, the public facility zone.
Yeah, it's different. Treated differently.
Sometimes I'm just wondering, often, it just depends city by city, but if it's a conditional use, then yes, it would have to
Yes, it
follow
would.
these. So,
That's it, right.
yeah. So I'm wondering, additionally, there might be a new park might be acquired or put in, and they might want an expansive area
Oh,
of grass.
That's a good point with the
So we
cemetery.
might want to,
Add in public.
something
But wouldn't the park fall
to
into
allow those.
that category?
What did you ask? I didn't hear.
I'm sorry, a park would be a different category. It wouldn't be industrial.
It's public facility, but I just looked up the zone to see if it tied itself back to the landscape ordinance, and it does.
And it does.
Can you add some language that talks about public facilities? Public
pre-approval?
something?
Or you could write more wishy-washy language, unless approved with the landscaping plan.
Unless approved
Unless
by
approved
the
by,
planning commission?
But then we have to come, that all comes to us.
Well, then we have
unless
to,
approved by the community development director.
Yes.
Sure.
yeah, I mean, the trick there is then we get to the situation where, oh, the rules don't apply to government.
They don't.
Oh, but I feel like commercial and cemetery are very different situations.
They are, absolutely, I agree, I'm not saying, I'm
So you could say for
Unless we're
commercial
gonna-
industrial development.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say, commercial and industrial, so say it for that. And I feel pretty okay,
so add that to the three.
yeah.
So then Commissioner Kerr's right, it doesn't apply.
I just like to find the exception and point it out, so that I don't want to shoot us in the
It is
foot.
a appreciated point
Yeah,
to be made.
well, because, no, it is a good one, because then that takes the weight off of Corey's shoulders later down the road.
So can we add that?
You can say like, shall there be a cemetery and a
Well, it'd say, I think we just add to the beginning of that, for industrial or commercial development.
Yeah.
Are we missing any categories, just to make sure?
No, it's all that's the three zones that applies to: public facility, commercial, and industrial.
Fair enough.
Residential is,
Different.
I also wonder why you went with the language of the expansive area use of water resource intensive turf and grasses. From my perspective, and grasses does not need to be included.
it's fine, because you have decorative grasses, but you have other types of grasses, and I'm wondering
So-
how that plays. Because the idea is any type of vegetation that consumes a lot of water.
Right, that wouldn't fall under grasses. I mean, you could have,
Well, to a common person, turf is not well understood.
Turf is a grass.
should we get the botanic name out? Should we
I
really get
I
specific
believe
there?
you from a technical standpoint, because you're right, does that mean decorative grasses?
Does it mean
But
decorative
it would tie
grasses?
back to intensive water resource for the,
Well, there's a movement, let's say, in the landscape industry. I want to
Gee.
take out my Kentucky blue and I want to replace it with clover. Because they say clover is less water needy. Well, is it really?
not really, just,
Not really.
it's more heat resistant.
So it's just a different ground covering, right? It really will use the same amount of water. It really can't handle the same amount of foot traffic. So what I'm getting at is
You could leave it as turf.
You
I'm
might
just using language that people think about. They don't look at, they don't say, I'm watering my turf today. I'm mowing my turf
I
today.
know, they say grass.
Well, and if you say turf, a lot of people think of artificial turf.
Or sports field turf,
Yeah.
which is different, or turf from a green or a putting green or something, but.
In state law,
Or
they
that arrow
define it
spray
as lawn
on
or
late night
turf.
TV for your hair.
Lawn or turf?
In the state water-wise landscaping statute, they define lawn or turf, non-agricultural land planted in closely mowed, managed grasses.
Maybe you say intensive lawn.
Or you could
Or
just say, lawn or turf or lawn or grass as opposed to grasses. I do consider grasses as those decorative grasses.
Yeah, there you go.
Often you use drought-tolerant native grasses sometimes in landscape.
Yeah, it's a great use.
Which are drought-tolerant. They're
Which
not-
are drought tolerant, they need, quarter of an inch every 2 weeks.
Water
They're perfect.
resource intensive lawn or turf?
Yes.
I'm good with that, if that's what the.
I like to stick to what the state's done, just match
lawn or turf.
And strike and grasses?
Yeah.
And we're gonna go with shall be avoided.
In only, how do you add and for the commercial and
For commercial and
industrial?
industrial development, the expansive
Okay,
area
got it.
use of water resource intensive lawn or turf shall be avoided.
Perfect.
Can I ask a question? So perimeter and internal landscaping to 50, I think is great. Buffer landscaping to 50 is great. Does this mean that each of them are separate categories that each must independently have 50%?
Yes, because buffer is its own category, because the buffering is separated out to take commercial
Right.
to residential, and so it has its own 50% sits in there, in its landscaping.
Right. Which, as long as it's applied that way, I think that's great. I don't want somebody to come in and say, oh, well, it's all 50%, I'll just make the site 50% and push all of my gravel out to the buffer.
Yeah, no, the buffer is its own category and its own requirements to meet.
Great.
And Corey, you're okay making the judgment call on what's decorative gravel versus junk gravel?
That's a,
Do you ever run into people wanting a
It's a hard one.
size? That's where.
Size of gravel?
Size of gravel. So what I think, what most people want to avoid is the teeny gravel, and I think the streets and the storm drain people hate the teeny rocks that get in the storm drain
Yes.
system. They plug it up. So just full disclosure, in Harriman, we decided 1.5 inches. 1.5 inches or greater.
and
Is
they
it
did
gonna
that, they did
mow
that for the
around?
park strip, for public property.
Yeah.
But
And-
it's
and
not,
jumping the-
there's nothing called out now on.
Yeah. It's a tough one.
1.5 is pretty big.
Yeah, actually, that's pretty big.
I mean, I can just think of a lot of park strips around the neighborhood here that have more like 3/4.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking a lot less than
Yeah, it travels so easy.
Well,
Anyway.
when they chip seal the roads, it's pea gravel.
Anyways.
That's what she
I
said.
do have one other thought. I wonder if we might discuss maybe perimeter and internal landscaping and what if I wanted to say, do 60%? Am I allowed to go over the 50?
These are
Can we
minimums.
just put a minimum
These are minimums.
of 50?
We don't have a maximum.
Is that where it says, is that how you interpret at least to the following extent?
Yes.
Yeah,
So then that number 50 becomes a minimum?
yeah.
Okay.
Because the idea is if you hit 75 as a minimum, they'll jump to turf pretty quick.
Because you can do lots of other types of ground covering besides.
Yep.
And I just want to make sure people can do that. Okay.
Do you feel like we need to say like at a minimum somewhere? Or
No, it
I
says
feel like it's-
at
okay.
least to the,
Good.
yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly.
Okay.
Did you, I have one more question. Did you think that there was a minimum acreage that maybe needed to be added for adding on of the landscape architects?
I think it lists an acre or more in the
Does
original.
it say that somewhere else, just not in this language? Okay,
Less than an acre is not, doesn't have to be.
right. But all commercial, or just, even if the commercial is less than an acre?
Even the commercial is less than an acre.
They don't have to?
They don't have to.
Looks great.
Thanks, Cory.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, this matter has been scheduled for a public hearing. We'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this time and close the public hearing as nobody's here to talk. So, any other further questions for Cory or anybody else?
I hereby make a motion for the planning commission to recommend approval of the proposed zoning code text amendment to CZZ 12.51 landscaping and screening as proposed by the planning staff in the staff report with the adjustments that we discussed, which are, you wrote those down.
Yeah, under bullet point 3.
3. Yes, under bullet point 3, it would be commercial and industrial. In industrial and commercial use, this expansive area use of water resource intensive
On or turf.
on or turf shall be avoided
There you go.
with suggested reasons for action, A through C in the staff report.
I second.
Great, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion to the motion? We'll start down there.
Wait, I think he's.
Oh, wait,
he
did
took
you
a
had
breath.
a-
He took a
I just
breath.
want to make sure that, are we dictating the language, or are we giving Lisa and Cory a little bit of wiggle room to make sure that that language turns out correct?
Oh, that I said?
Yeah.
Non-substantive changes allowed.
I, yeah, I mean, if,
I think-
unless the attorney has suggestions.
We might.
I want to give them just non-substantive changes are allowed,
Right.
to make sure that
Well,
the
and-
language conforms.
And this is going to go to the city council. They can make changes too.
Sure.
So they can recommend changes to the city council.
Yeah, but I think Commissioner Carey, I got to report what you made your motion on, so.
Sure. We made a motion, here's what we motioned, and then if they.
And then I can
decide-
explain where Lisa and I
If Lisa-
edited it.
If Lisa and Cory decide that this is garbage, then they can tell the city council.
Well, just,
Non-substantive.
just make sure
Non-substantive.
Don't have that much control.
the terms of art are used correctly and in the right whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Very
consistent terms.
Yes.
Great.
That's how I'm going.
Okay.
Mason didn't like my motion, now I'm getting it, I understand. I'm not as articulate as Lisa, I'm not a lawyer,
I still second it.
whatever.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to watch YouTube.
You good, Mason?
I am so good.
We're getting a little punchy. It's only 9 o'clock. All right, back again over here. Aye. Aye?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
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 All right, that motion passes. Thanks, everyone. Okay, Community Development Director's report and City Council report. Cory?
What did I say?
Let's see, we got Clubhouse Motors.
Yes, and I think we have one other item, right, Whitney?
Now the hive.
Yeah, the hive. See, I knew, I just didn't know.
Somebody's awake.
The zone map amendment for the overlay passed. They had a lot of discussion like the commission did. It was very much the same debate about what are we doing here. why, what's motivating it. But they said that they think the overlay is outdated, so they believe it needs to be fixed.
Awesome.
So they passed it, and then your goals. We're slowly whittling some away and enduring the others.
Great. Thanks, Corey. All right, so the last item on the agenda is to review the minutes, which I will admit, I am super impressed that you guys plowed through what I thought was going to be a 3-hour meeting in an hour and 40 minutes. What did that go? 1 hour and 41 minutes. Nice job.
When you gag the planner, it goes faster.
Apparently, I'm the long-winded one, I guess. Okay.
Corey was exceedingly efficient.
All right, anybody have any recommended changes on page 1? Page 2? I had one question, line 50. Looks like that was a suggested change at some point from would to maybe could. Is maybe could?
That's how my friend says it.
It coulda.
I'm in favor of maybe could just because it's fun.
I might could.
I'm not sure that it,
I might could
Could
appreciate.
you just say might be in compliance?
Might be in compliance?
Maybe.
So that might be in compliance sounds better than maybe could.
Is this a finding? Oh.
It's a red line.
Property.
it's line 50 on page 24.
Line 50
It's a
on.
red line.
It is.
Oh, yeah, that's a good fix. Well, I mean, sorry, in terms of what it was.
Can
Yeah,
we,
it,
can we
yeah,
change it to
it may be 2 words.
Yeah, may be in
The
compliance.
property may be in compliance with the 60%. We don't know, but it may be 2
All right,
words.
let's change it to may be with 2 words and strike the could, leave the would stricken.
And don't put anything about should.
The property may be in compliance. Okay, that sounds good. Better than maybe could. Okay, any other suggested or questions, suggested changes on page 3? Page 4? Page 5? Page 6?
There's also that red line there.
Do we have another maybe could?
I think we'd want to remove the before UDOT if we keep what has been changed. UDOT has now allowed truck traffic on the roadway.
Yep, so strike the,
And then the red line, strike the other part.
UDOT has now allowed truck traffic on the roadway. Great. Same on line 44? Oh, that's the change. Never mind. Okay, page 7. Page 8. Anybody have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.
Did you just memorize the?
No.